Nuclear War Survival Skills, Chapter 1 continued, page 24. Would result. The average temperature in the United States would be reduced for a few days from about 70 degrees Fahrenheit to approximately 50 degrees. In contrast, under the same conditions, Carl Sagan, his associates, and the Russian scientists predicted a resulting average temperature of about 10 degrees below Fahrenheit, lasting for many weeks. Persons who want to learn more about possible post-attack climactic effects also should read the fall 1986 issue of Foreign Affairs. This issue contains a long letter from Thomson and Schneider, which further demolishes the theory of catastrophic nuclear winter. Continuing studies indicate there will be even smaller reductions in temperature than those calculated by Thomson and Schneider. Soviet propagandists promptly exploited belief in unsurvivable nuclear winter to increase fear of nuclear weapons in war, to demoralize their enemies because raging city firestorms are needed to inject huge amounts of smoke into the stratosphere and thus, according to one discredited theory, prevent almost all solar heat from reaching the ground. The Soviets changed their descriptions of how a modern city will burn if blasted by a nuclear explosion. Figure 1.6 pictures how Russian scientists and civil defense officials realistically described before the invention of nuclear winter the burning of a city hit by a nuclear weapon. Buildings in the blasted area for miles around ground zero will be reduced to scattered rubble, mostly of concrete, steel, and other non-flammable materials that will not burn in blazing fires. Thus, in the Oak Ridge National Laboratory translation, ORNL-TR-2793 of Civil Defense, 2nd edition, 500,000 copies, Moscow, 1970, by Igorov Shlyakov and Alabin, we read, fires do not occur in zones of complete destruction that are characterized by an overpressure exceeding 0.5 kg/cm2, something about 7 psi. Because rubble is scattered and covers the burning structures. As a result, the rubble only smolders and fires as such do not occur. Here's the picture that this scientist was describing. It just looks like ashes coming down or something. And it's in Russian, so I can't read that. Oh, here it is. Translation. Radioactive contamination occurs in the area of the explosion and also along the trajectory of the cloud, which forms a radioactive track. Figure 1.6, drawing with caption in a Russian civil defense training film strip. The blazing fires ignited by a surface burst are shown in standing buildings outside the miles-wide zone of complete destruction, where the blast hurled rubber only smolders. Page 25. Firestorms destroyed the centers of Hamburg, Dresden, and Tokyo. The old-fashioned buildings of those cities contained large amounts of flammable materials, were ignited by many thousands of small incendiaries, and burned quickly as standing structures well supplied with air. No firestorm has ever injected smoke into the stratosphere or caused appreciable cooling below its smoke cloud. The theory that smoke from burning cities and forests and dust from nuclear explosions would cause worldwide freezing temperatures was conceived in 1982 by the German atmospheric chemist and environmentalist Paul Crutzen, and continues to be promoted by a worldwide propaganda campaign. This well-funded campaign began in 1983 with televised scientific political meetings in Cambridge and Washington featuring American and Russian scientists. A barrage of newspaper and magazine articles followed, including a scaremongering article by Carl Sagan in the October 30th, 1983 issue of Parade, the Sunday tabloid read by millions. The most influential article was featured in the December 23rd, 1983 issue of Science, which was the weekly magazine of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Nuclear winter, global consequences of multiple nuclear explosions by 5 scientists, R.P. Turco, O.B. Toon, T.P. Ackerman, J.B. Pollack, and C. Sagan. Significantly, these activists listed their names to spell TTAPS, TAPS, pronounced TAPS. The bugle call proclaiming lights out, or the end of a military funeral. Until 1985, non-propagandizing scientists did not begin to effectively refute the numerous errors, unrealistic assumptions, and computer modeling weaknesses of the TAPS and related nuclear winter hypotheses. A principal reason is that the government organizations, private corporations, and most scientists Generally, avoid getting involved in political controversies or making statements likely to enable anti-nuclear activists to accuse them of minimizing nuclear war dangers, thus undermining hopes for peace. Stephen Schneider has been called a fascist by some disarmament supporters for having written Nuclear Winter Reappraised. According to the Rocky Mountain News of July 6, 1986, 3 days later, this paper, that until recently featured accounts of unsurvivable nuclear winter, criticized Carl Sagan and defended Thompson and Schneider in its lead editorial. In Study of Nuclear Winter, Let Scientists Be Scientists. In a free country, truth will out. Although sometimes too late to effectively counter fast-hitting propaganda. Effective refutation of nuclear winter also was delayed by the prestige of politicians and of politically motivated scientists and scientific organizations endorsing the TAPS forecast of worldwide doom. Furthermore, the weaknesses in the TAPS hypotheses could not be effectively explored until adequate government funding was made available to cover costs of lengthy, expensive studies, including improved computer modeling of interrelated, poorly understood meteorological phenomena. Serious climactic effects from a Soviet-US nuclear war cannot be completely ruled out. However, possible deaths from uncertain climactic effects are a small danger compared to the uncalculable millions in many countries likely to die from starvation caused by disastrous shortages of essentials of modern agriculture, sure to result from a Soviet-American nuclear war, and by the cessation of most international food shipments. Chapter 2, Psychological Preparations. Learning what to expect. The more one knows about the strange and fearful dangers from nuclear weapons and about the strengths and weaknesses of human beings when confronted with the dangers of war, the better chance one has of surviving. Terror, a self-destructive emotion, is almost always the result of unexpected danger. Some people would think the end of the world was upon them if they happened to be in an area downwind from surface bursts of nuclear weapons that sucked millions of tons of pulverized earth into the air. They might give up all hope if they did not understand what they saw. People are more likely to endure and survive if they learn in advance that such huge dust clouds, particularly if combined with smoke from great fires, may turn day into night, as have some volcanic eruptions and the largest forest fires. People also should expect thunder to crash in strange clouds and the earth to shake. The sky may be lit with the flickering purples and greens of artificial auroras caused by nuclear explosions, especially those that are miles above the earth. Fear. Fear often is a life-saving emotion. When we believe death is close at hand, fear can increase our ability to work harder and longer. Driven by fear, we can accomplish feats that would be impossible otherwise. Trembling hands, weak legs, and cold sweat do not mean that a person has become ineffective. Doing hard, necessary work is one of the best ways to keep one's fears under control. Brave men and women who are self-confident admit their fears, even when the threat of death is remote. Then they plan and work to lessen the causes of their fears. When the author helped Charles A. Lindbergh design a reinforced concrete blast shelter for his family and neighbors, Lindbergh frankly admitted that he feared both nuclear attack and being trapped. He was able to lessen both of these fears by building an excellent blast shelter with 2 escape openings. Terror. If the danger is unexpected enough or great enough, normal persons sometimes experience terror as well as fear. Terror prevents the mind from evaluating dangers and thinking logically. It develops in 2 stages, which have been described by Dr. Waylo von Gregers, a physician with much war experience. In his book, Psychology of Survival, the first stage is apathy. People become indifferent to their own safety and are unable even to try to save themselves or their families. The second stage is a compulsion to flee. Anxiety, fear, and terror can result in symptoms very similar to those caused by radiation injury: nausea, vomiting, extreme trembling, diarrhea. Dr. von Gregers has described terror as being explosively contagious. However, persons who learn to understand the nature of our inherent human traits and behavior and symptoms are less likely to become terrorized and ineffective in the event of a nuclear attack. Emotional paralysis. The most common reaction to great danger is not terror, but a kind of numbing of the emotions, which actually may be helpful. Dr. von Gregers calls this emotional paralysis. This reaction allows many persons, when in the grip of great danger, to avoid being overwhelmed by compassionate emotions. And page 27. Horrible sights. It permits them to think clearly and act effectively. Atom bomb survivors. The atomic explosions that destroyed most of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were airbursts and therefore produced no deadly local fallout. So we cannot be sure how people would behave in areas subjected to both blast and fallout from surface bursts. However, the reactions of the Japanese survivors are encouraging, especially in view of the fact that among them, the relative number of horribly burned people was greater than is likely to be found among a population that expects a nuclear attack and takes any sort of shelter. Dr. von Gregers summarizes, in most cases, the victims were, of course, apathetic and often incapable of rational action. But open panic or extremely disorganized behavior occurred only in exceptional cases among the hundreds of thousands of survivors of the 2 atomic bombing attacks. Also encouraging, serious permanent psychological derangements were rare. After the atomic bomb attacks, just as they were after the large-scale conventional bombings. Help from fellow Americans. Some maintain that after an atomic attack, America would degenerate into anarchy, and every man for himself struggle for existence. They forgot the history of great human catastrophes and the self-sacrificing strengths most human beings are capable of displaying. After a massive nuclear attack, starvation would afflict some areas, but America's grain-producing regions still would have an abundance of uncontaminated food. History indicates that Americans in the food-rich areas would help the starving, like the heroic Russians who drove food trucks to starving Leningrad through bursting Nazi bombs and shells. Many Americans would risk radiation and other dangers to bring truckloads of grain and other necessities to their starving countrymen. Surely an essential part of psychological preparations for surviving a modern war is a well-founded assurance that many citizens of a strong society will struggle to help each other and will work together with little regard for danger and loss. Page 28, Chapter 3, Warnings and Communications. Importance of adequate warning. When Hiroshima and Nagasaki were blasted by the first nuclear weapons ever to be used in war, very few of the tens of thousands of Japanese killed or injured were inside their numerous air raid shelters. The single plane attacks caught them by surprise. People are not saved by having shelters nearby unless they receive warning in time to reach their shelters, and unless they heed that warning. Types of warnings. Warnings are of two types: strategic and tactical. Strategic warning is based on observed enemy actions that are believed to be preparations for an attack. For example, we would have strategic warning if powerful Russian armies were advancing into Western Europe and Soviet leaders were threatening massive nuclear destruction if the resisting nations should begin to use tactical nuclear weapons, with strategic warning being given by news broadcasts and newspapers over a period of days. Americans in areas that are probably targeted would have time to evacuate. Given a day or more of warning, tens of millions of us could build or improve shelters and, in other ways, improve our chances of surviving the feared attack. By doing so, we also would help decrease the risk of attack. Tactical warning of a nuclear attack on the United States would be received by our highest officials a few minutes after missiles or other nuclear weapons had been launched against our country. Radar, satellites, and other sophisticated means of detection would begin to feed information into our military warning systems almost at once. This raw information would have to be evaluated, and top-level decisions would have to be made. Then attack warnings would have to be transmitted down to communities all over America. Tactical warning, which means attack warning, of an out of the blue Pearl Harbor type attack would be less likely to be received by the average American than would an attack warning given after recognized strategic warning. However, the short time, only 15 to 40 minutes, that would elapse between missile launchings and the resultant first explosions on targets in the United States would make it difficult for even an excellent warning system to alert the majority of Americans in time for them to reach the best available nearby shelter. Strengths and weaknesses of the present official warning system are summarized in the following two sections. Then the life-saving warnings that the first nuclear explosions would give, especially to informed people, are described. Official warning system. The U.S. official warning system is designed to give civilians timely warning by means of siren signals and radio and television announcements. The National Warning System, NAWAS, is a wireline network which is to provide attack information to official warning points nationwide. NAWAS is the acronym, is not protected against electromagnetic pulse, EMP, effects from nuclear explosions. When the information is received at warning points by the officials who are responsible, they will sound local sirens and initiate radio and TV emergency broadcasts if power has not failed. Officials at NAWAS warning points include many local civil defense directors. NAWAS receives information from I'm going to end it right there.